Imagine this. You are sitting in the public gallery of the House of Commons. Below you, the chamber is debating a piece of legislation that will directly affect your community, your neighbourhood, your children's school, the hospital you use, the planning decisions that will shape the street you live on for the next 20 years. And you notice something. The person making the argument against this legislation, the person standing up and speaking most passionately about why it should be rejected, is not a British citizen. They were born in another country. They hold the passport of another country. They may hold dual citizenship and owe allegiance, in some formal legal sense, to another state. They were elected to represent a British constituency in the British Parliament, and they are making decisions that will affect the lives of British people, decisions about British law, British spending, British foreign policy, British defence, without any of those decisions affecting them in the same way they affect the people they nominally represent. Because if things go badly wrong, if the legislation they supported turns out to be catastrophic, if the policies they advocated for damage the country they were elected to serve, they have somewhere else to go. A second passport, a different home, a different national identity that is entirely unaffected by the consequences of the decisions they made as a British parliamentarian. You're not sure how to feel about that. Not because you are prejudiced, not because you think people born outside Britain are less intelligent or less capable or less morally serious than people born inside it, but because you cannot shake the feeling that representation, genuine representation, requires a stake, an irreversible, undiversifiable, inescapable stake in the outcome. One man has stood up in Parliament and said what most people have been thinking privately for years. His name is Rupert Lowe, and the proposal he made this week, that foreign nationals should be banned from both standing for election and voting in British elections, has divided opinion more sharply than almost anything else he has said since entering politics. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what Lowe is proposing, what the legal and democratic arguments for and against it are, why he claims all major parties secretly agree with him but will not say so publicly, and what this proposal reveals about the deeper questions of national identity, democratic legitimacy, and political representation that Britain has been avoiding for a generation. This is not a simple story. The strongest arguments on both sides deserve to be heard properly, and by the time this video ends, you will have heard both of them. Let us start with what Lowe actually said, because the media coverage of this proposal has been characteristically more interested in generating heat than in generating light. Lowe posted a statement on social media following the formal registration of Restore Britain with the Electoral Commission. The statement was direct and unambiguous. Foreign nationals should not hold elected office in Britain. They should not stand as candidates. And his position extends further. They should not vote in British elections either. He supported this with a claim that is either politically courageous or politically reckless, depending on your perspective. He said that Labour, the Conservatives, the Greens and Reform all privately agree with this position, that it is supported across the mainstream of British political opinion at the level of private belief, but that none of them will say it publicly because they fear the reaction from the media, from campaign groups, and from the communities that might be most directly affected. This is a specific and falsifiable claim. Either the private beliefs of mainstream politicians align with what Lowe said publicly, in which case his accusation of collective dishonesty about a significant democratic principle is a serious and important one, or they do not, in which case his claim is wrong. The response from the major parties to date has been to condemn the statement publicly while declining to engage with its substance, which is precisely the kind of response that makes Lowe's accusation of political cowardice look more credible, not less. Let us examine the substance. First, let us establish the facts about the current situation, because many people are surprised to learn what British electoral law currently permits. In the United Kingdom, citizens of Commonwealth countries and of the Republic of Ireland who are resident in Britain are currently permitted to vote in all UK elections, not just local elections, general elections, the elections that determine who runs the British government and who sits in the British Parliament. This means that a citizen of Australia, Canada, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, New Zealand, Nigeria, South Africa, or any of the other Commonwealth nations who has moved to Britain, established residency, but retains the passport and citizenship of their home country, has the right to vote in British parliamentary elections to help determine who governs Britain without being a British citizen, without having made a formal commitment to Britain as their primary national allegiance. The number of people in this category is significant. Commonwealth migrants represent one of the largest demographic groups in Britain. Many of them have lived here for decades, built lives here, raised families here, but they have done so while retaining the citizenship and national identity of another country, a citizenship that gives them the right to return, to reside, and in many cases to vote in the elections of that other country. On the question of standing for election, the right to become a member of Parliament, the rules are somewhat different. EU citizens lost the right to stand for Parliament after Brexit, but Commonwealth citizens and Irish citizens retain it. A person who holds no British citizenship, who owes formal allegiance to another state, who holds the passport of another country, can be elected to the British House of Commons and participate in making British law. This is the legal reality that Lowe's proposal is responding to. And before engaging with the arguments for and against his position, it is worth sitting with that reality for a moment, the case for Lowe's position. The fundamental argument is about the nature of democratic representation and the concept that has been central to political philosophy since the ancient Greeks, the idea of having skin in the game. Democratic representation works best, arguably only works properly, when the people making decisions share the consequences of those decisions with the people they represent. When the legislator who votes for a policy lives under that policy, when the politician who commits the nation to a course of action is committed to that nation in return. A politician who holds dual citizenship, who maintains the formal right to live under a different national jurisdiction if the decisions they make in Britain turn out badly, does not share the same relationship with the consequences of their decisions as a politician whose only home is Britain. The asymmetry is structural, not a matter of individual morality or intent, but structural. This is not a hypothetical concern. It is a real feature of the relationship between political representation and accountability. The person who can leave does not face the same consequences for getting it wrong as the person who cannot. Lowe's argument extends to voting as well. The vote in a democratic election is not just an expression of preference. It is an act of co-authorship of the society that the vote helps to create. When you vote, you participate in the collective decision about how your community will be governed, about what laws you will live under, what taxes you will pay, what foreign policy will be conducted in your name. The implicit logic of universal franchise within a nation-state is that the people who vote are the people who will live under the consequences of the vote, that the electorate and the polity are coextensive, that the people making the decision and the people affected by the decision are the same group of people. When large numbers of voters hold the citizenship of other states, when they have the formal option to leave and live elsewhere if the consequences of their vote turn out to be unpleasant, that implicit logic is broken. Not dramatically, not in a way that makes the elections immediately illegitimate, but meaningfully, in a way that deserves engagement rather than dismissal. The international comparisons are not trivial. Germany does not allow non-citizens to vote in federal elections. France does not. The United States does not. Japan does not. Most democratic countries in the world have concluded that the right to participate in national elections is connected to citizenship, to the formal, legal, irreversible commitment to a national community that citizenship represents. Britain is unusual in extending national voting rights to non-citizens from Commonwealth countries and Ireland. The historical reasons for this extension are understandable. The legacy of empire, the particular relationship with Ireland, the desire to maintain connections with the Commonwealth. But historical reasons do not automatically constitute current justifications. The world has changed since the legal framework for Commonwealth voting rights was established. The demographic reality of British politics has changed, and the question of whether the framework remains appropriate is a legitimate one. The case against Low's position. Let us be equally rigorous about the arguments on the other side, because they are real and they are serious. The most powerful argument against Low's proposal is the argument from integration. For decades, Britain's approach to managing large-scale immigration from the Commonwealth has been based, implicitly if not always explicitly, on the idea that granting political rights to immigrants accelerates their integration into British civic life, that voting creates a stake in British society, that participation in British democracy is part of what transforms a resident into a citizen in the meaningful, functional sense even before formal citizenship is granted. There is genuine evidence for this argument. Political participation is strongly correlated with civic engagement. People who vote, who feel they have a voice in how their community is governed, are more likely to invest in that community, more likely to learn the language, to understand the institutions, to build the relationships across community lines that constitute genuine integration. Removing voting rights from long-term residents, people who have been in Britain for decades, who have built lives here, who regard Britain as their home, even if they have not formally renounced their country of birth, might do the opposite of what Lowe intends. Rather than accelerating integration, it might deepen the sense of parallel community, of being present in Britain without being part of it. The argument about standing for election raises different considerations. The question of whether someone who was born outside Britain can effectively represent British people is, on one level, answered empirically rather than theoretically. There have been British MPs born outside Britain who represented their constituencies with distinction and who were regarded by their constituents as excellent representatives. The quality of representation is not determined by birth. It is determined by character, by commitment, and by the relationship between a politician and the people they serve. The second significant argument against Lowe's position is the argument from proportionality. Even if one accepts that there is some tension between non-citizen voting and the ideal of a coextensive electorate and polity, the practical significance of that tension in Britain's actual political landscape is limited. The number of elections that have been determined by non-citizen Commonwealth voters is small. The policy outcomes that can be attributed to the non-citizen voting bloc are not obviously distinguishable from outcomes that would have occurred without their participation. Is the principle important enough to justify the practical disruption and the genuine unfairness to long-term residents that removing voting rights would cause? Lowe's answer is yes. The principle of democratic legitimacy requires that the people making collective decisions about a country are people who are formally committed to that country. The unfairness to individuals who would lose voting rights is real but secondary to the systemic principle. His critics' answer is no. The principle, while theoretically coherent, is not sufficiently violated by the current arrangements to justify the disruption, division, and genuine harm to communities that its enforcement would cause. Now let us address Lowe's most explosive claim directly. His assertion that Labour, the Conservatives, the Greens and Reform all privately agree with his position, but will not say so publicly. This claim deserves scrutiny rather than dismissal. Not because Lowe is necessarily right, he may not be, but because the pattern he is describing of political opinions held privately and denied publicly for fear of cultural and media reaction is a well-documented feature of British political culture. We know from published polling that public opinion on immigration, on integration, and on the rights attached to residency in Britain is significantly more restrictive than the public positions of most major parties would suggest. The phenomenon of politicians being unwilling to say publicly what a significant majority of their constituents believe privately, and what those politicians may themselves believe privately, has a long and well-documented history in British politics. Lowe's accusation is not that mainstream politicians are lying about their policy positions. It is that there is a gap between what political figures believe when they are speaking honestly in private and what they are willing to say in public because the professional and reputational costs of saying it are too high. Whether or not Lowe's specific claim about voting rights is accurate, the broader phenomenon he is describing, The gap between private belief and public statement on questions related to immigration, integration, and national identity is real and is one of the defining features of British political culture over the past 30 years. Enoch Powell spoke of a similar phenomenon in a different era. The response he received, immediate denunciation, instant dismissal from the shadow cabinet, systematic exclusion from mainstream political life, demonstrated exactly the mechanism by which certain positions become unsayable even when they are privately held by significant numbers of people. Lowe is making a different argument in a different era about different questions, but the structure of his accusation, that politicians say privately what they refuse to say publicly because the cost of saying it is too high, lands in a political culture that has experienced this phenomenon repeatedly and recognises it. Let us now talk about what this proposal reveals about the deeper questions that British politics needs to answer. Britain is a country that has managed, over the past 70 years, one of the most significant demographic transformations in its history. The arrival of large-scale immigration from the Commonwealth, from South Asia, from the Caribbean, from Africa, and more recently from Eastern Europe and beyond, has changed the composition of Britain's population in ways that are visible in every major city and in many towns and villages across the country. This transformation has brought genuine richness in culture, in cuisine, in music, in business, in science, in sport. The contributions of people who came to Britain from other places and of their descendants to the fabric of British life are real and significant. It has also created genuine tensions in housing, in public services, in cultural identity, in the question of what it means to be British and what obligations and rights attach to that identity. These tensions have been managed, if managed is the right word, primarily by not discussing them honestly, by treating questions about integration, about national identity, about the rights that should attach to residence versus citizenship, as questions too sensitive to engage with directly in mainstream political discourse. The result has been a growing gap between the conversation that happens in living rooms, in workplaces, in pubs, and on social media, where these questions are discussed with frankness, and the conversation that happens in Parliament and in the mainstream media, where they are approached obliquely, if at all. Lowe's proposal about foreign national voting rights is the latest instance of someone attempting to force the gap closed, to bring a conversation that happens privately into the public square, where it can be examined, debated, and resolved democratically, rather than suppressed and left to fester. Whether his specific proposal is right or wrong, and the arguments on both sides are substantial, the act of making it publicly, plainly, without the euphemisms and qualifications that mainstream politicians deploy to avoid the reaction, performs a function that goes beyond the individual policy question. It demonstrates that the question can be asked, that asking it does not end careers or destroy parties, that the British public is capable of engaging with difficult questions about democratic legitimacy and national identity without the sky falling in. That demonstration may ultimately be more significant than the policy itself. Here is the bottom line. Rupert Lowe said publicly what most British politicians say privately and then deny: that the people who make decisions about Britain should be people who are formally, legally, and irreversibly committed to Britain as their primary national community. That the vote in a British election should belong to people who will live under all the consequences of that vote with no exit option. That democratic legitimacy requires a coextensive relationship between the people who decide and the people who are decided for. The counter-arguments are real. Integration, participation, the contributions of long-term residents, the genuine unfairness of removing rights from people who have built their lives in Britain, all of these deserve serious engagement. But the proposal deserves serious engagement too, not dismissal, not the reflexive denunciation that prevents rather than enables democratic debate. The questions Lowe is raising about citizenship, about allegiance, about the relationship between political rights and national commitment are questions that every democracy has to answer. Most of them have answered it differently from Britain, and Britain's unusual answer, the legacy of empire and commonwealth that extends national voting rights to non-citizens, deserves examination rather than automatic preservation. Whether you agree with his answer or not, refusing to engage with his question is not a defence of democratic values. It is a demonstration of exactly the political cowardice he is accusing his opponents of.